Hey guys, I'm going to go ahead and go over the PowerPoint notes that I sent at the end of last week to get us into what's going on with World War II here at home. So I am referring to, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm getting it mixed up because my notes are numbered the same as your notes. So I think what is set, I want to say 71 in your notes. Is what I'm going over today, and then tomorrow I'll get us into the PowerPoint over what's happening in the war in Europe versus the war in the Pacific, because that's the biggest thing that makes World War II so different, is the fact that we're not fighting a war on two fronts, we're fighting a war in two different hemispheres. And we call it theaters. We call it the European theater and the Pacific theater. But really quick, a lot of this was in your packet and your IDNSQ questions talking about Roosevelt's cash and carry policy. So you've got the U.S. staying neutral, and we kind of find wiggle room and ways to get around what's happening. We don't want to get involved, and we don't want countries getting mad at us, specifically the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and accusing us of getting involved in the war because we're selling wartime materials. So we come up with what we call a cash and carry policy, and of course, to be considered neutral, we have to offer this across the board to everybody. Now, obviously, you know that the Axis powers are not going to purchase this from us, but we have to put it out there that we'll sell it to whoever will, number one, come pick it up, that's why it's called carry, and pay cash for it. Hence, the cash and carry policy. So anyway, the Axis powers are officially formed. We do know that after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which I know I haven't officially got to yet, but you know it's coming, that Germany and Italy are going to offer up an alliance with Japan, hoping that they would also help fight in Europe, which is not the case. Obviously, once we know everything is getting worse instead of better, we do start the draft up in 1940, what we call the Selective Service Act. Roosevelt goes for his third time, again, setting a record. 1940, he runs for his third term in office. We know that he will win. It's almost like a landslide situation to where a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, you don't really want to mix up or change who your leader is when you're in the middle or right at the brink of something. And we are definitely what we would call the brink of war, getting ready to go to war at this point in time. So 1940, again, remember from last week, June of 1940, we know that France surrendered. So it's just the Soviet Union and the British that are fighting the war in Europe. Again, things are going downhill pretty quickly for the Allies. We are getting nervous. So we're going to start ramping up our efforts to prepare for anything that could be potentially coming. And we weren't so ready for what is about to come. We also established what we call the Lend-Lease Act here again to try and keep us from being accused of being officially in the war. We loan Great Britain what they need, and we say that we're going to lease it to them, meaning that they do owe us money and payment for it, and the British will actually work out a deal to where they open up territories that we can establish naval bases. And so, again, we're looking for a way for this to benefit us, not just help our allies. And we also, I want you to highlight, circle the Atlantic Charter, excuse me, to where we signed that with our bestie. We signed that with Great Britain. And this, a lot of it resembles Roosevelt's 14-point peace plan. He says that we need to open up and have freedom of the seas, no secret treaties. A lot of these answers we talked about in your packet, but this is trying to spread and make a way for democracy in the rest of the world. Okay, now here's where we start getting into the big stuff as far as us getting ready to get involved in World War II. So, again, we have officially established a war on two fronts in Europe. We know that the Axis forces are divided up. Eastern Front going against the Soviet Union, Western Front going against France has fallen, so not France, but the British on the Western Front. A lot of early success for the Axis powers. We do hit a stalemate. Don't forget, we talked about stalemate. Stalemate just means that nobody's gaining any ground. We finally have been able to hold back, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Allies, have been able to hold off any further German or Axis power advancements. Now, what helps on the Eastern Front, the Axis powers versus the Soviets, is that the Axis powers are not used to such a harsh winter. The Russians or the Soviets are. And so this is not a big deal for them, but it kind of works in their favor to where kind of the war in Europe hits the pause button and fighting kind of stops for a couple of months because the winter gets so bad. But here's the problem. The Germans make it almost to the gates of Moscow, and Moscow is the capital of the Soviet Union. So it's kind of like in all those games where if you get the capital, it's game over, right? So a very scary situation because if the Axis powers were to go after and cause another Allied power to collapse and crumble, this story could be have a very different ending to where it was not an ally victory. It could have gone a lot worse. We could all be speaking German right now. That's what I'm saying. That it could have gone a lot worse. So thank goodness that things are falling in the right place to where the Axis powers are stopped at a very pivotal moment in time. The Soviets are trying to keep the Axis powers fighting a war on two fronts because, again, that divides up their forces, that divides up their supplies and materials. All right, now, this is where we talk about the U.S. officially getting into it. Again, we say we are pushed because we're doing everything we can to hold off. And so on a very big day, a very big moment in our history, happens December 7th, 1941. It is an early Sunday morning, around 7:38 a.m. It's not completely a surprise attack because we really felt like the Japanese were coming, but we really thought that it was going to be an attack on the continental U.S., not on not on Alaska, or not in Alaska or Hawaii. We really thought it was going to be in the continental U.S., and we really thought that it was going to be probably California on the West Coast. So anyway, we had established an embargo, meaning an embargo just means we had cut off all trade. As soon as the Japanese attacked the Chinese and invaded Manchuria, China in 1937, we cut off all trade. We're not giving them the resources that they need, and they knew that was coming. So they kind of had ammunition ready that whenever we react that way, that they're going to give us a dose of our own medicine and show us that we're not as big and bad and powerful as we think that we are. And this is an attack they had been planning for years. And when I say for years, I mean that there were Japanese spies that were inside the United States for several years prior to this. Like, they were building models of how they were going to attack us at Pearl Harbor. They had replicas of the ships and everything. So this is something that they had been planning for years. It was not just a spur-of-the-moment thing. So again, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to lay out all the puzzle pieces. We're trying to decode messages that are being sent from the Japanese embassy in Washington back to Japan. Unfortunately, we don't put the puzzle pieces together in enough time before the attack on Pearl Harbor happens. It is one of the single deadliest days in American history up until 9/11 happened. Roosevelt has another famous quote. He says, "This is a day that will live in infamy. We will never forget it." We have so many soldiers and sailors that perished that day, both on land and at sea. We have several of our battleships that capsize and go under, including the USS Oklahoma, the USS Arizona. And if you ever get a chance to watch the movie Pearl Harbor, to at least watch that portion of it, it's amazing. And I realize that movies aren't the same as real life, but to just imagine what those young guys were going through is devastating, and I can't imagine. So anyway, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we officially declare war on both Japan, the Axis powers in Europe of Germany and Italy, to officially get into the war in World War II. All right, I'm going to stop there because I'm going too long.